Welcome to the Maximize Business Value Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition their business on their terms. Our mission was born from the lessons we've learned from over 100 business transactions, which fuels our desire to share our experiences and wisdom so you can succeed. Now here's your host, CEO of Mastery Partners, Tom Bronson.
Hi, this is Tom Bronson, and welcome to Maximize Business Value, a podcast for business leaders who are passionate about building long-term sustainable value in their businesses. In this episode, we're going to be talking with Lad Hirsch, an attorney with Winstead in Dallas, who specializes in business divorce. I first met Lad a few years ago when he made a presentation on business divorce for Business Navigators Directors Group. Business Navigators is a servant leadership organization in Dallas, and the Directors Group is a special interest group of business navigators for people who serve on boards of directors. His presentation on business divorce was amazing. I was intrigued the entire time, and I'm thrilled that he joins us today to share some of his insights and knowledge. So welcome to Maximize Business Value, Lad. Tell us a little bit about Winstead.
Well, thanks, Tom. I really appreciate the kind words. Look forward to being with you, and it's nice to have an opportunity to visit with you while I've been sheltering at home. I hope everyone is safe and staying well out there. So Winstead is a full-service regional firm. I'm in the Dallas office. We've got 7 offices in Texas, and we just recently opened an office in New York as well, and we service the business community.
So just kind of everything, full service, I guess, means just kind of all kinds of legal matters for businesses.
Yeah, I'd say it runs the gamut. I mean, so everything from real estate, finance, banking, litigation, corporate matters, transactions, it runs the gamut. I mean, we wouldn't do something like personal injury, but we also have a high net worth group. We call it wealth preservation, so estate planning. So pretty much things that you would expect business owners and investors to need in the business world.
Awesome. So a large regional firm with hundreds of attorneys handling all kinds of legal things. The first time I ever heard the term business divorce was at the presentation that you gave a few years ago at Business Navigators. What is business divorce?
Well, I think people hear that term and they think it may involve a family law matter, and I'll mention in a minute it can, but a business divorce basically is a conflict that arises between owners and investors in any kind of private company. If you are in a public company, let's say you own Apple as a stockholder and you don't like the new iPhone, you can sell out because there's a public market. But in a private company, there may not be a market for your ownership interest in the company. And so when you're going through a business divorce, it's how are you going to structure the exit of a business partner from the business. And it's all types of businesses, whether they're limited partnership, an LLC, an S Corp, all kinds of industries. But another way to look at it is, how do you structure a partner exit from a privately held business? Because there may not, as I say, be a market for those shares. And I mentioned the family law area. I am also I'm not a family law lawyer, but I'm working increasingly in the family law arena, where I'm hired by one spouse or the other to assist them when they're going through a divorce. And my focus on and assisting them is on the division of ownership interest in the marital estate in various private companies, and how do you structure during a divorce the division of their ownership interest in these private companies.
Okay, so now does Winstead do any divorce things, or just focused on the business side?
We are not a marital law firm, so you would not hire Winstead to handle your divorce. But if you are in a marriage in which you and your spouse own significant interests that are valuable in private companies, it's not easy. I mean, if your marriage is involving ownership interest in bank accounts, right? You split those accounts. If it's a piece of real estate, you sell the real estate. Or one person gets the real estate, another person gets the value of their half interest in it, and they get a cash settlement. But when you're talking about privately held companies, what are those worth? and how do you divide them, and are you going to remain an ownership, have an ownership that's a retained interest after marriage? What we have found in a lot of these cases is there's a very significant liquidity problem. The liquidity problem is this: the business may be worth 25, 35, $50 million, and one spouse wants the other's interest in it, but doesn't have half that value outside the business to pay for it. Well, how are you going to structure a transfer of a 1/2 interest in that valuable business when there's not enough cash to pay for it? So structuring that ownership and that exit is something that requires there's not one cookie cutter way to do it. It requires some finesse and some skill and some expertise to talk about ways to structure a division of that asset.
Got it. So I want to back up a little bit to the whole concept of business divorce. So give me some examples of the types of stakeholders that you would represent. I mean, are these shareholders, option holders, majority owners, minority owners? What are we talking
Well, it runs the gamut. I would say my practice is equally divided, roughly equally divided. Half the time we represent a majority owner, and half the time we represent an individual or a group who hold a minority stake in the business. So let's assume it's an oil and gas business and it's worth $50 million, and the majority owner has gotten crosswise with the minority owners who hold a 30% stake. Well, if the majority owner doesn't have a redemption right, the right to redeem the interest of that 30%, he or she is stuck with that 30% ownership interest. And that's a conflict. So the question is, well, how can you resolve that? Because the majority owner wants them to leave, but offers a price, and they're not willing to accept that price. So that's why I say the majority owner is stuck with that piece of equity being out to a group that is now potentially hostile to the majority owner's interest. So a majority owner is going to want to have a redemption right to redeem the interest of minority owners. By the same token, on the minority side, if a minority owner, and I've had this happen where minority owners, even though they're sophisticated business people, I had one business person say to me, "I'm ready to be essentially cashed out because I own, a 20% interest." And I said, "Well, this isn't like Las Vegas. There's not a window. It's a cashier window, and you take your chips and you go to the cashier and you say, okay, I want my 20% cashed out." If you don't have a buy-sell agreement in place that enables you to put, it's called a put right. If you can't put your interest to the majority owner and require a buyout, then you're stuck holding an illiquid, unmarketable interest in a private company. This wasn't, you said you saw my give a speech a couple of years ago, but maybe more than 10 years ago, the very first speech I gave on this area was called "Mamas, Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Minority Shareholders Without a Redemption Agreement," right? Because no one, Willie Nelson probably is cringing, but no one wants to be holding something that they can't get rid of because it may be highly valuable, but if you can't monetize your minority ownership interest, that's a tough spot to be in. And on top of that, it can be worse than that because these are pass-through entities from a tax perspective, which means minority owners get a K-1 at the end of the year, and that K-1 reflects what they owe in taxes based on the profits of the entity during the year. And minority owners tend to expect that they will receive a distribution that is sufficient to cover the amount of tax they have to pay based on the company's profits. But if the majority owner decides to retain the profits to reinvest in the business, the minority owner has something called phantom income. And it's called phantom income because they get a K-1 that says you owe tax on $300,000. And the minority owner says, well, I didn't get a distribution of $300,000, but you still owe the tax. That's called phantom income. So if your LLC agreement or limited partnership agreement doesn't require the majority owner or the general partner to make a distribution sufficient to cover your tax liability, you could end up getting phantom tax and be required to pay tax even though you receive no distribution.
Wow. So just if you're a minority owner, then let's say that you're a minority owner or a group that is a minority owner and you didn't set this stuff up in advance, are you just basically out of luck, or are there things you can do?
Well, it's a great question, and we have that happen a lot where it depends on the level of dysfunction within the company. If you're at all-out war with the majority owner, at that point, you're not going to get the majority owner to agree to a buy-sell when you're in a serious state of conflict. But let's assume that things are not terrible, but they're starting to have some issues in the company. That's a point at which both sides may have an interest in negotiating an after-the-fact buy-sell agreement. Why? Well, because the majority owner may not be happy with the minority owner and may say, well, sure, I'll give you a buy-sell, meaning the right to trigger your right to be bought out by me, but you've got to give me a right to redeem you and buy you out.
Right.
So then you get to the next stage of negotiation, because any minority owner who gives a redemption right wants to also make sure to get something called a look-back provision. What is a look-back provision? The worst place for a minority owner to be is to sell out on a Friday, and a week later, the majority owner sells the business for a much higher valuation. And the minority owner feels like they got shafted in that situation. But if you have a look-back provision, that's a negotiated term, the length, but typically you'll have at least a year where if you sell to the minority owner, if you sell to the majority owner as a minority owner, and there's a transaction that takes place within the next year at a higher value, then the minority owner would receive a stepped up payment to address that difference in value. But if you don't have that, the minority owner very much could be stuck with, and maybe it's not a week later, but 6 months later after you sell, a much higher valuation takes place. The minority owner felt like that was going on at the time. So the only way to protect yourself as a minority owner is to make sure you have this look back provision. The other thing is that on this issue of can you do it after the fact is the minority owner may say, well, if you will give me a buy sell, which is the right to trigger this, I'll agree not to exercise it for some period of time. So maybe I have a right to demand a buyout, but I won't trigger it or exercise it for at least 2 years, 3 years. And the same thing on the majority side. Look, we'll work through these conflicts, but let's give each other the right to exercise either a purchase or a redemption, but let's agree not to trigger it for some period of years. And then you get, Tom, to the next big issue is, and this is what's a big part of the fight in business divorce is, what's the value?
Right.
What is the value of
I've said for a long time, lad, that the only way to truly value a small business is find a willing buyer and a willing seller who agree on price, because there's all kinds of factors that go into determining what a business is worth. So how do you solve that?
Well, I will tell you that, as I mentioned, since I do work in the family law area, I typically am hired on the wife side of marital disputes, where the husband is the owner operator of the business, and he generally has business lawyers he's already working with, so he's not supplementing his family law counsel by hiring outside counsel, whereas the wife's family law lawyer wants a business lawyer to assist. And what I see in these cases is the husband has what I'll call the golf course value, meaning when he's on the golf course, the value is up here. Yep. And when he's in the divorce court, you can't see on the screen, but it's way below the screen what the value is, right? So in answer to your question, how do you address the value? Well, in a buy-sell agreement, if you have one, it will absolutely address how value is determined. And you can do it through a formula, which is set forth in the agreement. For example, you could do it as based on revenues, and the parties can agree, I'm making this up, it's 4.5 times revenue. That's going to be the value. Or you can do it by hiring a valuation expert. And one side can agree to hire the valuation expert. If the other side doesn't agree with it, then they can hire a valuation expert. If they're more than 10% apart, then the two valuation experts can recommend a third, and then you end up with 3 and you average them. That's another way, to get to it. But what's really critical to mention here is this, because I have sophisticated clients who are minority owners who don't appreciate that. When you value a private company, there are typically discounts that apply to minority held interest in the business for lack of control and lack of marketability. They're called DLOC, discount for lack of control, and DLOM, discount for lack of marketability. And those discounts can be as much as 60% of the total value. So if you're getting a buy-sell and you have an expert, and it's not enough to just say, we'll have an expert determine it. You need to say that the expert will determine it without application of any minority discounts if you're the minority owner, because you don't want to have your 30%, it's valued at $3 million, and then subtract the discounts for lack of marketability and lack of control. So the discounts, and whether they apply or not, is really a key matter to be addressed when you value the business.
Wow, that is so important. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. I do love the thought of, hey, if we determine that this business is worth, for in your example, 4 times revenue or whatever. Which, by the way, nobody gets 4 times revenue. In case most of you are wondering that, right? I mean, or you read about those. That's when Google buys somebody that's got disruptive stuff. But if that was the agreement, then that makes it very simple, even though it may not represent the true value of the business. So interesting. So it sounds like a lot of times you're dealing with folks who are getting in trouble kind of on the back end. What are some ways that business owners can plan in advance for a business divorce?
Well, that's the question. I mean, we call it, the term we use is a corporate prenup.
Oh,
And every business owner who's bringing partners into the business should want a corporate prenup, for the reason that you don't, again, want to be stuck with someone. People change over time, or they get divorced, or they die, and now you're dealing with the relatives of your partner. So having the ability to redeem the interest of the limited partners or minority members of an LLC is a really critical aspect for the majority owner. And from the minority perspective, again, you don't want to be stuck holding this illiquid, unmarketable interest. So you want to have a buy sell. So basically having an exit plan at the time the business is formed, and if it involves multiple parties, or if you are investing and making a substantial stake and taking a substantial stake, you want to have an exit plan at the time so that you know it. I mean, what I've seen at high net worth clients will assume they have this cash out right? And they're told at the time they make the investment that there's going to be some sort of a liquidity event in 5 to 7 years. There's going to be a merger, a recapitalization, an IPO, and that we anticipate you'll get your money back, or get bought out in 5 to 7 years. But when you actually look at the document and the agreement, there's nothing in there. So making sure you have an exit plan at the time of investment, or that you have a redemption right if you're bringing new partners in, is really critical. And then the other thing I would say to majority owners, who I think is your client base, is you don't have to provide equity. There's something called stock appreciation rights, SARs, or sometimes it's called phantom stock or synthetic stock. All those there's some variations, but basically what you're doing is you're giving someone a right to receive compensation in the future based upon the success of the business. It's typically a formula driven. So let's assume you get 20% of something called a stock appreciation right. What that means is that if the stock or the value of the stock goes up by 20%, you then will receive a bonus. So you're giving someone a stake in the business, but it is not an equity stake. It's a stake of an ownership right based upon the performance of the business and the metrics that you want to decide. So you're giving a real value, because what someone who receives stock may not appreciate is you're not getting a guarantee you're going to receive anything. If someone gave you 20% of the stock in the business, you're only going to receive something if A, the business is sold, or B, there's a distribution. So you're not necessarily giving cash. And so when you go home and tell your spouse, we just got 20%, and the spouse says to you, well, what does that mean we got? Well, maybe one day in the future we'll get something. Where if you get a stock appreciation right, or a phantom stock or synthetic stock, and if there's a formula, what you can say is, if we hit these formulas this year, we're going to get X amount. And the advantage of that from the majority owner is that if the person leaves the business, that goes away.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas when you give someone 20% of the equity, you can fire them the day after you give them the equity. But unless you have a redemption right, they're going to continue to be a 20% owner. And I've got a number of majority owner clients who have people who have minority owners who've kind of gone to the beach. They're sitting on the beach, still owning 20%. And my clients are very frustrated that there's 20% of the equity of their business tied up, and they have no way to redeem it because they don't have a redemption right.
Wow. Well, we're coming up on a break, but real quick, if you don't do the advanced planning, what are kind of the worst scenario outcomes that a business owner or a minority owner can expect?
Well, the other thing I should mention is that when you give, and I say give, I mean, it's typically done as an incentive to try to incentivize employees when you're giving them equity. If you give equity out, all of a sudden you have created liability for yourself. And what I mean by that is that a minority owner in a business has a right to bring a claim for breach of fiduciary duty against the managers and officers and directors of the business. which didn't exist before they got that equity right. So now you do something that you think is in the best interest of the business, but if the minority owner and you are really crosswise, the minority owner now potentially has a claim against you for engaging in self-dealing and doing something that they feel like that you put your interest first. So you've now created a target on your back. And I've had many majority owners say to me, no good deed goes unpunished. Here it is, but I've given this stock, and now the people that I gave the stock to are suing me. The answer is yes, because you now gave them the right to have because you now created fiduciary obligations that you owe to the fiduciary obligations. To be clear, are owed to the company. An officer and a director owes it to the company. But when you have a ownership interest, you can bring a derivative lawsuit in the name of the company against the officers and directors for breach of their fiduciary duties. So you've created a potential liability for yourself by allowing someone else to have ownership interest in your company.
Yeah, so sometimes a business owner thinks they're doing a big favor or whatever, but there are ways to give stock. There are ways to accomplish that without having to have those additional liabilities.
Well, when you do the stock appreciation rights, there's no fiduciary duty associated with it. If you have an SAR or a phantom stock or a synthetic stock, those are contract rights. There's no fiduciary duties that are owed.
Awesome. All right, we're up on a quick break. Back in 30 seconds.
Mastery Partners equips business owners to maximize business value so they can transition on their own terms using our 4-step process. We start with a snapshot of where your business is today. Then, we help you understand where you want to be and design a custom strategy to get you there. Next, you execute that strategy with the help of our amazing resource network. And ultimately, we help you transition your business on your terms. What are you waiting for? More time? More revenue? If you want to maximize your business value, it takes time. Now is the time. Get started today by checking us out at masterypartners.com or email us at info@masterypartners.com to learn more.
And we're back with Lad Hirsch at Winstead. So Lad made a blog post on the WinsteadBusinessDivorce.com website recently. The title of that blog post was Unlocking Hidden Business Value, Securing Top Dollar by Giving Full Appreciation to All Available Assets on the Sale of a Private Company. So when I read that post, I thought about the value of intangible assets that are hidden, basically hidden in sight, right? The post was on point, and I encourage all of our listeners to go read it at WinsteadBusinessDivorce.com website. But let's touch on a couple of those points here. Intellectual property or IP may be one of the most important intangible assets a business can possess. What are some of the most overlooked IP things that business owners should protect?
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the plug for the blog. Well, first, I think it's important to state that many, I don't know if I want to say most, but probably even most small businesses, emerging businesses, don't have any patents. And maybe the reason they haven't is because they haven't wanted to spend the money to go get a patent. And it's not an inexpensive process or a short process. It takes a while. You've got to hire lawyers, obviously, who are specialized in patent prosecution to get your patent applied for. And it's probably tens of thousands of dollars to get just one patent done. It's probably, a low cost, maybe 20 to 25,000. And, so that may not be worth it. And the second thing is, from a business strategic standpoint, when you apply for a patent, you are giving the world access to the information in the patent. And if people then use it, you've got to then, if you want to stop them, file a lawsuit for infringement of the patent. And companies may decide, I don't really want to be in litigation bringing claims for violation. I'd rather keep it a secret, what I do, and not put it out there. So there's a business strategy at the outset to decide, do I want to invest the money in getting the patent, and then do I want to enforce my patent? Because if you put it out there and you don't enforce your patent, then you're giving it up. And was that really a good idea? So don't pursue a patent unless you're prepared to enforce it, is what I would say. But once you do it, I think you are starting to add value to your company, because what you inevitably find is you start with one patent, and then there's a related item, and then you get a second. And so now you've turned your company into having a patent portfolio. And having a patent portfolio when you go to sell your business is going to have value, because there will be a value assigned to what those patents are worth. Maybe you haven't been licensing them as broadly as they could. Maybe there's opportunities to expand them. So giving yourself a patent portfolio adds a whole new category of value to your balance sheet. So it's worth considering, do I want to go through that or not?
So what are some of the things that you can patent? Can you patent? Most people think of patents when I think of it. In fact, I'm thinking about things I've invented, right? Software or a widget. I invented this pen, so I can patent the design on the pen. Are there other things that you can secure a patent for?
Well, yes. Well, you mentioned software, and software you can get certain kinds of patents, but also when I say patents, we can expand that to now you can get copyrights, obviously, on software. So that's a much cheaper way to make sure that all of your
copyrights as valuable as patents.
Well, I would say probably not, but still you want to protect something that you've created, so you should get copyright protection on your software. But you can get software. There's also business process patents. So maybe the way that you do something is, and the process in which you do it is something that can be patented. There are design patents. Maybe your small company is manufacturing something and you figured out a new way to create a design, and then you could get a design on that patent. You've just re-engineered essentially the way something's been done, but it's different enough. It has to be unique. That's one of the aspects of patentability. You have to have a unique. It can't be something that's obvious. But if you have a unique design that you've created in manufacturing something, that's another aspect of something that could be patented. So I'd say software patent designs or designs or some of the, and business processes are some of the most common that small businesses may have.
Wow, that we had a patent situation a number of years ago on a company that we had acquired. They were midway on the patent, so they had been pre-approved, and then we had to come to the decision, is this patent going to be worth it? Because they sold the business to us when it was midway. And I will tell you that we made a mistake. We decided not to patent the process, and then all of our competitors started to use the process, and we should have perfected that patent. We should have finished it up. So I'm a real life story, folks. Go out and get those patents that you need. So intellectual property, that kind of thing. Another intangible that you mentioned in the article is workforce. So as you know, I work with a lot of business owners and investors. And when you ask a business owner, typically, what is your biggest asset? Almost universally, they'll say, our people. And yet many of them overlook relatively easy ways to protect this most important asset. So what are some things that a business owner should do to protect their workforce, particularly in terms of building business value?
Well, I'm going to answer your question a little indirectly, because I think I would reframe the question, if I can, to say, if I want to make sure that I have the most value from my workforce, what's the first thing that I should do? And the way I would answer that question is, I would strongly consider whether you have non-compete agreements in place.
Okay.
Because if a buyer comes in and wants to retain the workforce and there are no non-competes in place, they're going to be worried that some of the top people or key people upon you selling the business are going to go away, and that will diminish the value of the business.
So, but look, I'll tell you that, the common belief out there is that non-competes are unenforceable. Is that true?
Well, it's interesting. I hear that, and I would have said 15 years ago in Texas, that was largely true. Okay. But that's old news. I'm not going to say fake news. I don't want to, but it's old news, and it's not correct news. The Supreme Court, Texas Supreme Court, has issued a series of rulings universally, unanimously in favor of employers enforcing non-competes. Now, I don't mean that the takeaway shouldn't be that every non-compete agreement is enforceable. There are some that are so overbroad that those individual agreements can be either invalidated or lessened and restricted. But as a general statement, absolutely, courts are upholding non-competes, non-solicitation, non-raid agreements. They are enforceable, and they bind employees. And so what ends up happening is there's a negotiation, potentially litigation. So the hiring an employment lawyer to make sure that you have enforceable employment agreements in place will protect you upon the sale of your business. Now, if we're talking about salespeople, that is a more difficult non-compete to enforce. But if you're talking about some of your top executives who you would want to be bound to the business for the next 2 years, then that is something that should be seriously considered. So that's the first thing that I would say from a business owner perspective. The second thing I would talk about from a business owner perspective is understanding what the attributes are of your workforce. And what I mean by that is you have to try and step outside of, and this is in connection with the sale of your business, because that was the blog post was about what are some attributes of your business that you're not appreciating have value. Well, one of them may be that you have a really crack marketing team at your company. And then the question is, well, how are they marketing? Are they marketing face-to-face? Is it advertising, promotion, cold calling? What are they doing? And that way of you marketing may be transferable to a new company that doesn't have that. So when your business is sold, the fact that you're selling your business, instead of just looking at what your revenues and what your profit margin is, what your EBITDA is, you're going to say, well, wait a minute. If you look at what my sales team or my marketing team could do with your company and your products, there's real value there. And you can talk about what a projected number would be. I assure you that when the buyer, this is your area more than mine, you can speak to it better than I can, Tom, but when the buyer looks at your company, they're looking at the combined value of your business to determine whether they want to buy your business. And so if you're pitching to them and saying, look, when you buy my business, what you're not appreciating is that my sales force or my marketing team is going to be able to take that product of yours because you're not marketing it in the right channels. We can take that and we can grow that, and I should be paid something for that. Now, maybe you won't get money up front, but maybe you can negotiate in the sale that if the combined value of the business goes here, you get an additional money after the sale. But my point is, you have to understand what the capacities are of your salespeople, marketing people, and understand what all those attributes are of your team.
That is a great point. And it's also not only your team, but as you're saying that, it occurs to me that, whoever the buyer is, you need to really try and get into the mind of the buyer and figure out what it is that they're going to bring, how this acquisition is going to bring them real value, and think about the things that you have that perhaps they already know, but they don't know that you know. And so, but once you articulate them, you might be able to extract higher value because...
Well, there's a story that was told at a seminar. I can't remember if you were at, this was in the Vistage program earlier. I guess it was late last year or earlier this year. I guess it was in February of this year. And one of the consultants there was talking about the sale of a telephone book company. And you would think, well, how would there be value in the sale of this telephone book company in some Midwestern state?
Yeah, by the way, for our younger listeners, a telephone book is where we used to go and look up numbers, right?
Exactly. And you'd be thinking there's like no value there. Well, what they pointed out was that the buyer loved the sales force because those people who were selling the phone book were on the phone all the time making contact. And they wanted that group of online salespeople, and that was where they saw the real value in the business.
And that's brilliant. Yeah, that's a brilliant. So I was in that same thing. That is a brilliant strategy, because if you can sell Yellow Page advertising now on the phone, man, you can probably sell anything, right?
Well, yeah. And so my point is, you have to it's hard to see yourself the way others see you, but the point is, think about how you're valuable from the perspective of the buyer, because you're looking at your business and how you value it. You've got to look at it and how the strategic acquirer is going to value it.
Wow. Yeah, it's so important. So important. Now, of course, there's going to be two sides to that equation. A buyer may say, I was a buyer many times. As you know, I've done 100 transactions. And many times the sellers would try to argue the combined value, and of course my argument would be, I'm only going to pay you for what it's worth today, and the investments that I make, I'm going to benefit from. But certainly there could be some middle ground there where I might have paid a earnout or some other mechanism, if in fact what they believed was going to come true. So
right. I just think if you're bringing value to the, there's only so much value there. But if you're selling something and saying, I believe that this combination will generate X amount, then you make it an earnout or a bonus or whatever you want to call it based upon you delivering that.
Yeah, especially if you're going to work for the buyer, and you can actually impact the outcome there, then that's a great method to be able to do that. So there's lots more in that article, and I hope that our listeners and watchers will go to, it's Winstead Divorce. What is it? Winstead
Business Divorce.
WinsteadBusinessDivorce.com and look at that article. It's a short read, and of course, Ladd posts there on a regular basis, so you'll get all kinds of valuable information. Let's change gears real quick as we get toward the end here. Of course, this podcast is being recorded during COVID-19, and many of us are under stay-at-home orders. What are the top intangible assets that business owners should really think about protecting during turbulent times like this? This is not the only turbulent time in our history, right? There's stock market turbulence, there's economy, economic turbulence. There's all kinds of things that go on. What if you were put yourself in the advisor position of a business owner or an investor? What are the top 3 assets that business owners should protect even during times like this?
Well, I think that my answer is probably pretty obvious, but it's the stakeholders in your business, right? And the first stakeholders will be your employees. What can you do to make sure they're safe, they're protected, they remain intact, they all have families? What can you do to preserve them and make sure that when, and hopefully, God willing, sooner than later, we are able to resume business activities, that they're ready to go and that they're not in crisis themselves? What can you do to help your stakeholders, your employees through this? Then your owners. If you're the sole owner, it's you. But obviously, if you have other owners who are have a stake in your business, then you want them to be supportive as well. So what can they do? And then the others who are, yes, they're really, maybe they're employees, but they're also your team, if you will, your management team. What can you do to help them? So it's your stakeholders, your key management team, your employees, downline employees, and and I should also mention, of course, your clients. That's the other thing is, I've seen just really remarkable stories of people who've reached out to be helpful to their clients. So from the lawyer's perspective, we have gone out and talked to clients and said, free of charge, can we draft some new documents for you? Can we draft new force majeure provisions for you? Can we look at your contracts? I mean, what can we do to be helpful to you? And some of it with the meter turned off, just to be a resource for you. And so the question is to your clients, what can you do to be helpful to them? My brother-in-law is a restaurateur in town, and now, he's dealing with creating menus, if you will, that are for takeout, and creating something that helps people. And so I saw, my brother-in-law didn't do this, I don't think, but people were delivering a roll of toilet paper with their food.
Actually, there's a sort of a mid-sized chain in town that not only is doing the prepared meals that you can pick up or carry out, but they also have grocery items. So it's all the items they have in their kitchen, and they listed toilet paper on there. So if you need to buy a roll of toilet paper, call me. I can get you.
Yeah. So it's basically taking care of those who allow you to do your business, your employees, your clients, your management team. I think those are the 3 that you mentioned. And I think they're all pretty obvious. But the other thing I would just say, it comes from the blog post again, is crisis management can be overwhelming. And so take care of yourself. I would stress that as well. That means get some exercise, get some sleep. Don't let your food, just because you are the business owner, you need to take care of yourself.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. So one last question. So the podcast is all about maximizing business value. What is the one most important we're all about taking massive action too, and telling our listeners to go and do something today. So what's the one most important thing that you would recommend that a business owner take in order to build long-term sustainable value from your perspective?
Well, it's hard to give one answer to that because I think it differs depending upon what your business is. But I guess my answer would be is don't think short term, think long term.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is develop a vision. And frankly, it's get some to do that vision is I would not just be relying upon my own resources. If I was going to give one piece of advice to business owners, it would be get outside input. Whether that's joining Vistage or YPO or YEO or hiring a coach, get some other folks because it's very hard if you're just feeling like you're in a bunker to be able to develop that long-term vision yourself. And I would say get a team of outside people that you can trust who will give you some honest feedback. And what the successful business owners I've seen are ones who were not myopic and only looking out in their own bunker, but were getting input that really helped them grow their business and develop a longer term vision.
Yeah, that is a great point. In fact, I just want to add to that many of our clients, when all this kind of broke out a few weeks ago, a lot of folks in my position, as I'm talking with folks who do similar things or serve similar types of clients, are saying, well, geez, everybody's pulling back. They're thinking internally. Well, we turned that around. We told our business owners, look, you're always trying to find time to go and be strategic. Look, take care of the issues, take care of the fires that are going on. But now, since you're kind of sequestered at home, you have time to think about and be strategic. And so that's what all of our clients are doing right now is now that we're kind of through that initial phase, they're being very strategic about their business. So one last bonus question that I like to ask our guests. What is the personality trait that has gotten you into the most trouble through the years?
Well, I was thinking about that. You did give me a cue that you might ask that, and I didn't have an answer, but I thought about it. Not because there weren't, it was which one? And I think the answer is impatience. I tend to feel like I have an answer and I know the path, and if others aren't already on the path and aren't seeing it, that I'm ready to get to the bottom line too quickly. And so from a spiritual perspective, I know there's a saying that God gave us 2 ears and on 1 mouth, so we should listen twice as much as we talk. And so I've really tried to help manage my lack of patience and be more patient and be a better listener and not jump to the conclusion or too quickly.
Wow, that is a great one. That, maybe I should stop asking that question because every time someone answers it, I go, man, I have the same problem. So how can our listeners and viewers get in touch with you, Lad?
Well, they can obviously go to the website, winsteadbusinessdivorce.com, which has all my contact information, or you can go to Winstead's site and I'm on there. Or I think if you Google Lad Hirsch, I'll pop up pretty quickly. And then I'm also on LinkedIn. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm there as well.
Wow. So thanks. And if you haven't gone to check out that website, folks, you ought to go do that. WinsteadBusinessDivorce.com. You've got all of his contact information there. What a great time to have you on the show today. Thanks for coming. So also remember to check out our other podcasts and our blog posts at our website, www.mastery, that's master with a Y, masterypartners.com. We have tons of free tools there to help you think about building long-term sustainable value in your business, even during challenging times like these. So until next time, I'm Tom Bronson, reminding you to stay safe and to go maximize business value.
Thank you for tuning in to the Maximize Business Value podcast with Tom Bronson. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners. where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition on their own terms. Our mission was born from the lessons we've learned from over 100 business transactions, which fuels our desire to share our experiences and wisdom so you can succeed. Learn more on how to build long-term, sustainable business value and get free value-building tools by visiting our website, www.masterypartners.com. That's mastery with a Y, masterypartners.com. Check it out.
That was perfect. I wouldn't make any changes on that.